Just started it.
Okay, great. All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the North Carolina Accessibility Community of Practice. Is spring here to stay? I'm curious to know. And if you think so, can you put some spring emojis in the chat? Weather is going kind of wild. I think it might be here to stay. Does no one think it's here to stay? This is my slick way of getting people to come to the meeting so they see all these chats and flowers popping up. Yes, there we go. Not here to stay. Somebody said not here to stay. The fickle North Carolina weather. The third false spring. That's possible. And Karen, you have your hand up. Is that just you voting saying it's for spring, or do you have a question? Just voting. Great. All right. So I was digging up some stats recently on our community here. We have 514 members, which is awesome. Amy met with some other states' accessibility leads, and they were discussing kind of what they were doing. And we found out we had one of the largest accessibility community of practices in every state. So that's fantastic. And if you're a beginner, you're welcome here too, because we have a 6% advanced, 39% intermediate, 55% beginner. When you signed up to join this community, you filled out a form and you guys said your own experience. You kind of self-reported it. So yeah, beginners are welcome. And one of our most common interests in that same form, our most common interest was document accessibility. And I don't think that's too surprising because of how difficult it is. And so that's what today's presentation is going to be about. Amy and I started, we were getting so many requests for help with document accessibility, PDF accessibility. We started this PDF open office hours that meets twice a month. I'm gonna, at the end of the presentation, I'll give you some links for that. But in that meeting, people brought some really great questions. And Amy and I don't pretend to be experts in documents. You know, we're great at web and HTML accessibility. But someone showed up to that meeting, and he's here today. It's Josh Barton. And he just really stood out as an expert, someone who's in this stuff all the time and just really knows the discipline well and gets into the complexities. And so we recognized that, and we asked him to do a presentation today on how he addresses document accessibility and forms and things like that. So I'm really excited to learn from him. So if you'll turn your attention here to Josh Barton.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and steal the sharing rights, hopefully. And you all should now be able to see my slide deck. I'm not actually going to go into the slide view just because we're going to bounce around through a few things. But kind of here is our agenda for today. So one of the things Amy and John asked me to do at the beginning was kind of just share a little bit about myself and my why behind the digital accessibility work. From there, we're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft Office and the Microsoft suite of tools as a whole, and starting with that source file and why that is crucially important for working on document accessibility. Then we'll spend some time actually playing around in Adobe Acrobat, showing my process for PDF remediation and all of those pieces. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. Do feel free throughout the session today, if questions pop up, come off mute, ask those questions. You can drop them in the chat. Hopefully John and Amy will help me monitor that a little bit, because I know it can be a little difficult to multitask and do all of those things. So here's a little bit about myself. So I currently work in our North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I am within our Office of Exceptional Children there at NCDPI, and my official title is the IDEA Consultant for Assistive Technology. Um, for those of you that aren't super familiar with what that means, ultimately what that means is that I am providing guidance and support to all of our school systems across the state, both our traditionals and charters, in regards to how assistive technology can help support our students with disabilities better access and participate in their free and appropriate public education. Um, and with that being said, assistive technology runs this really wide gamut. It's everything from sticky notes and pencil grips, and color overlays and stuff like that, really low tech or kind of no tech even, all the way up to really complex systems like screen readers and communication devices and all those kinds of things. I come to this work as that of an exceptional children teacher. So I actually started out subbing. I thought there was no way I would ever be a special education teacher. Um, my dad was a special education teacher growing up, and it was like the last thing I thought I would ever want to do. Mainly just because, teaching is hard and often undervalued. But I was working towards some other degrees, ended up losing a job as a contractor, and needed some work. And so I started subbing and then was a classroom teacher assistant, and then decided I'd go back to school and get my teaching degree, and became an exceptional children's teacher. I have an undergrad in adapted and general EC curriculum and a master's in severe disabilities. And so what that means is that I started my work in the classroom supporting some of our most complex learners in the state. I was supporting students with really significant cognitive impairments, but also some really complex motor impairments. From that classroom teaching position, I was able to move up and do some more district-wide supports, doing some coaching for all of our classroom teachers in a district in the western part of the state. But then also I led assistive technology efforts in that district. Um, and so part of what I did all along through that work was I was always looking for those opportunities to maximize that engagement for my students. I was quick to adapt new technology and look at innovative ways to use that technology in supporting my students and their ability to participate. And so I did things like I had a Wiimote smartboard. So I took Wiimotes for that video game console and did some modifying of other pieces so that it was an interactive display then that my students could use. I was using iPads in like a flip system so students could engage on the iPad to interact with stuff on displays. Really lots of creative ways to try to explore and use technology in ways that maybe even they weren't intended to be used for. But that kind of brings me to what pushed me to kind of where I'm at now and my understanding as it relates to supporting this work. And so I actually had a student that I was tasked with supporting. I was not a primary support for that student, but because I was leading the assistive technology work in that school system, I was tasked with helping make sure that her technology worked and integrated with all of our systems in the school, but also supporting the staff that were directly teaching that student and ensuring they had everything and those resources were able to support them as well. And so the student was completely blind and AIG in all academic areas. And so that meant that she was engaging in content at a really high level. And in an effort to make sure that she could have that meaningful experience and active participation, we had to ensure that everything that was going on in her spaces was fully accessible. And so that's what really got me excited and got me to a place where I had to dig in to document accessibility, especially was in looking at supporting her teachers and her in being capable of accessing and participating with the same activities everybody else in her classroom space was working with. And so from there, I've kind of navigated through and launched into my own training and experiences around understanding how to do this work. One thing that's a little bit different for us in DPI versus a lot of other instances, state agencies, is we have access to a couple of different authoring platforms. Thank you, April, for putting that in there. Right, AIG is academically and intellectually gifted. Um, so we have a couple of different authoring platforms we are able to use in the agency, and that's in large part because we're looking to directly support our school systems across the state, as we refer to them, our public school units. And so with that, we can author in Google or the Microsoft Office suite of tools. Today, we're going to focus our efforts within that Microsoft suite of tools because I know that's what the bulk of the rest of our state agencies have access to. And I've told Amy and John when we talked about today's session that I felt like it was really important that we start with some conversations about the Microsoft suite of tools. And when we go to look at actually working through a form and making it accessible, we're going to start in Microsoft. So I tell all of the folks that I'm supporting within our agency, the way we're approaching this accessibility work right now, Donna Murray, who previously presented in this group, has retired. And so our digital accessibility lead is no longer in our agency. And so we now have a task force that is represented by a diverse group of people across DPI. So we have folks from our comms team, we have folks from graphics and web design, we have individuals from our technology staff, our digital learning and school connectivity folks who directly interface with school-based technology leadership and media leadership. Um, and then we have folks from our Office of Exceptional Children that are helping lead this work. And what we talk about within that space is that whenever possible, it is best to start and easiest to start in that source file location. So if we're working with a document that potentially was authored in Microsoft Word first, we want to find that document if at all possible. Similarly with PowerPoint, and then Excel is a whole different beast in and of itself. If you don't have access to a source file, those of you that have participated in that open office hours for PDFs have heard me mention before that it might be worthwhile to consider kind of doing a reverse workflow of exporting it out of the PDF source document back to Word. And towards the end, if we have time and that's something you all want to see, we can do that as well. And I can show you how that looks and what that means to do that. But the other thing I wanted to make sure we highlighted early on today as well was the way kind of Microsoft distributes their stuff. Sometimes as I've been supporting individuals and working through document accessibility, we've come across challenges. I am a native Mac user. My entire house is Mac. So when given the choice, when I came on board at the agency to use Mac or Windows, I opted and asked for a Mac. And so my workflows are a little bit different because of the Mac operating system and the way the Microsoft suite of tools functions in there. And as such, sometimes the user experience for somebody else that I'm coaching or supporting in this work may look different. And that's because Microsoft rolls out their updates kind of in a strategic rollout pattern. And so I've looked to highlight that here on this slide. The first people that get any updates Microsoft's looking at doing are those folks that are kind of an insider and tapped into those insider channels. But then for most other updates, they'll push it out to the Windows operating system first, then their web-based apps, and then Mac is kind of the last place that gets any of those updates. And why that's important to understand is we can see different experiences across those spaces. And so I felt it was helpful to point that out early here as well, because as I'm doing things within my instance of the desktop version of Microsoft Word on the Mac, it may look different than what you're experiencing. So let's get that out of the way here early on. And then I also wanted to highlight here early on kind of that there's two primary ways that are best to move a document from Word to that PDF. And we're actually going to do that here after I get through the next slide as well. One of the things we want to make sure staff are never doing is print to PDF. We don't want to do that because you will lose all of the accessibility functionality that you've spent time developing in that authoring suite. So there's two choices. There's the Acrobat tool within the ribbon, if you have Acrobat Pro installed on your machines. And then you also can do a file save as and then select save. And we'll actually demo that here in just a minute. The last piece I wanted to kind of push out there before we get into an actual doc and walk through my process is, some of those just general reminders within your platform. So in general, it's important to recognize that typically content that's been put in a header or footer is not voiced by assistive technologies. Now, there are ways if you're pushing it out as a PDF or other final product that you can retag those things and get them voiced, but we want to be thoughtful about that and not relay information only in those spaces. Additionally, within our styles pane, there's an option for a title style. That does not get traditionally voiced in an important manner either. When we get in there. And John, great point. Don't confuse header with heading. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at the document too. But thanks for putting that in the chat. So what we encourage in DPI is that we don't use that title style at all, and instead we use an H1 or our heading 1 level of styles to convey that title information. And there's some strategies we can do if you want to have information in the header so that it carries across subsequent pages. But then also within DPI, we encourage folks to really only use one heading 1. That is not a required element by any means in WCAG. It's just kind of a standard operating procedure we've established to help keep that heading 1 content separate from some of the rest of the resources. When individuals are navigating in a document using a screen reader, they can navigate by headings alone or by links alone or just by your lists. And so kind of being thoughtful about how you're designing things on the front end can really help. Other things to think about when preparing that document to become a fillable PDF are that you might do some things in these documents that you're not traditionally going to want to do in any other document. So an example of this here would be the use of a table just for layout. Traditionally, we would encourage folks to not use a table in that fashion at all. We want to use tables for data and for organizing information in meaningful ways, but not to just kind of structure out your document. In a fillable form, if that's going to be the final version of it, it could be helpful to use a table for placeholders to give you your fillable form fields. And we'll see that here in just a minute. Always want to think about what that final distribution is going to look like. So is it going to be a web form? Is it going to be a source document from the authoring space? Is it going to be a PDF? What other options are you considering? Because that can shift some things, and really be thoughtful about the space you're allocating within your designs. All right, so I'm going to hop out of the presentation. We're going to jump over to Microsoft Word, and we're going to talk through some pieces there within Word. I see another question. So now headings in HTML become H2 in Word. So it depends, Jessica, on the nature of your document. So your headings should convey the most important information within your document. So we usually use a heading 1 for our title, the main idea of what the entire document is, and then our heading 2s would be subsequent kind of sub information, the next most important pieces. And as we're thinking about headings, of course, we want to go in a logical sequential order. So we'd never skip from a heading 1 to a heading 3. We'd go heading 1, heading 2, then heading 3. So those are some of those pieces. All right, so for today's purposes, in an effort to actually be able to get through content and show you guys how I work through these resources, I've kind of just developed this super simple fillable form. And there's some elements that I'm going to point out on this form as some highlights to think about. And it's also important to understand that we're all in various stages of this accessibility journey, right? I think likely as John was showing some of the statistics, I probably did not rank myself as advanced. I consider myself to be kind of in an intermediary stage. I recognize now that may be a little silly, but there's still plenty of space for me to learn and grow within this work. And so here we have a sample document in Microsoft Word. Some of the structuring things that I've done here already is this sample fillable form, which would traditionally be the title actually of our fillable form. I have gone ahead and tagged it as a heading 1. So part of why I like having the source file is because changes within the source file are traditionally easier than a PDF. If I notice a spelling error, it's a lot simpler to make that adjustment here. Even though you can edit a PDF, it presents complexities from the accessibility side if we're editing in the PDF. So within this document, I wanted to go ahead and add some organization to it. Using those headings helps with table of contents creation, but also document navigation in general. So I've gone ahead and labeled this title for this form as a heading 1. And you can see that here in my styles pane, but also I could open up the more traditional complex styles pane over here on the right-hand side if I wanted to see all of the styles within the document. When I looked at this document as I was developing it, I went ahead and recognized there were 3 catchment areas, right? We have the main title, but then we also have this preferences section and this additional information section. And in my brain, it makes sense that I wanted to go ahead and add some extra structure to these other two catchment areas. So I've gone ahead and made the preferences and my additional information my next heading level. So both of those have been tagged as a heading 2, and I can see that up here in the ribbon. So from here, I can look at other elements within this. One of the pieces that I shared on the slides was that we want to be really thoughtful about space. Jessica, I see you have a question. Go ahead, come off mute and ask away. All right, I'm going to keep going. So when I say that we want to be thoughtful about space, when we're working in a PDF and it's a fillable PDF, it does not have the ability to adjust text field spaces. So whatever space you allocate in that final product is all the more space that's available for text to be added to. And we'll look at some settings within that for how to adjust that. But ultimately, what will end up happening potentially if you don't have enough space is that the font size will get incrementally smaller to a point at which it could be hard to read the text in that space moving forward. So we want to think about that. So as I'm looking at, no worries, Jessica, as I'm looking at this section down here at the bottom where we have information around address, city and state, and zip code, this table was inserted just as a traditional table. And we've got a lot of extra just kind of wasted space here after those areas of information that could be made available to add those text elements later on. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over just to maximize my space for somebody to be able to write their address in that box in that final format. So we want to think about those types of structural elements. Something else that I'm seeing up here that I don't really love is, when I got this form, it was set up to demonstrate the style for the date of birth that we wanted added. It's giving some reference points in there of what it should look like in that final copy. That is going to result in 3 separate text entry points. And what I know about fillable forms is there's a way we can structure this space to actually just give the date in the format we want. So I'm going to go ahead and modify that here as well before we move on. Some other things to think about while I'm making this modification would be how this information gets conveyed over. So when this gets tagged over, lines like this will be included with the full name. And there's some ways you can fix that in the PDF. But sometimes that's why I oftentimes will like to use a table for these layout features instead of doing an underscored line like this, because there's some ways I can hide, this top bar of the table, the top outline of that cell to make it look similar, but be a little more user-friendly for me. So some things to think about there as well. The last piece that I want to point out here in Microsoft Word before we look to move this over to the PDF is another step that we need to do, which is giving the document its metadata. So a flag that you'll get if you're using the pack checker that people have seen me reference before is a missing metadata information piece. You can fix that on the back end in the PDF, but it's a good practice to start doing it natively in your authoring tool. So to do that in Word, we're going to come up to File, and then we're going to go down to Properties here. And here in that Properties menu that pops up, we're going to navigate here to the Summary space. And it's in this space where we actually give this document its background metadata. That metadata then transfers over to what's displayed within your PDF title space. It's what is voiced when somebody opens the PDF to let them know what type of document they're in. And generally speaking, I only really worry about making sure 2 spaces within this metadata area is completed, and that's the title. And so I'm just going to put my title here, so sample fillable form, and then the author. And I like to leave this author space kind of defaulted to whatever office within our agency has developed the document. So since I do most of this work within the Office of Exceptional Children, I would change this to read NCDPI Office of Exceptional Children. And then I can just hit OK. And at this point, I'm going to want to make sure I save that. And then I'm ready to go with doing the next piece of actually moving this over. Rashna, You said you can't find this option in Word. Are you
Yes,
using the web browser version of Word, the
it,
desktop application, and then which style computer?
it's a desktop version of Microsoft Word on Windows, not on iOS.
Okay, and so sometimes it looks a little bit different in regards to where it is. There might be an options instead of the properties menu. I'll
Okay,
circle back to that towards the end when we can dig in a little bit further, but
okay,
you should have either options or properties within that file menu.
okay. I'll also find it out meanwhile.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so now that I've got kind of all of the work done that I wanted to do within the source platform, I'm going to look at, I'm going to show you guys the two different options. Yeah, perfect. I found it under View, Properties in the ribbon on Windows Desktop. Thanks for sharing that out. And then Laura shared, I have our notes on where that is, and we'll put it in the chat. Thanks, Laura. All right, so here, once we're kind of ready to go, you've got two options of how we move it out of Microsoft Word and over to Adobe. So if you have Adobe Acrobat Pro installed on your computer, one option you should have within your ribbon of tools would be the Acrobat panel. This looks different on a Word or a Windows-based computer for sure than it looks like on my Mac. You've got potentially a couple other options in here, but it's pretty limited on the Mac. So really the only option I have is the Create PDF option here. And I like to show people both of these options because, as you'll see here in a minute, what results in your tags is often different depending on which method you follow here. One method's not better than the other. One method's not right or wrong. It just results in a different kind of post-production piece in Acrobat. So if I do create PDF, it's going to give me another prompt. I can say to always remember my choice. And then it will start the process of launching Adobe and doing that document conversion. So it's going to automatically open the file in Adobe for me and have it ready and available for me to look at and work through. So we're going to just leave that there for a minute, and I'm going to go back to Microsoft to show you the other option. Awesome. Thanks, guys, for putting those supports in the chat. So the other option is that we can go to File, Save As. If you're not seeing Save As available, it is likely because autosave is toggled on within your web application. So if you don't see Save As within your options, look to see if autosave is toggled on and toggle it off for this purpose. So then we go to File, Save As, and your Save menu pops up. And yours is going to look a little bit different on Windows than what you're seeing on my screen. It'll be up here, and you'll have some additional options you would need to drop down. What I want to look for, though, is this file format choice within my available options. And with this file format choice, I want to then select from the dropdown PDF, which you'll find under Export Formats. You can sometimes find export to PDF available within your file command, but I have found that the save as method works most consistently. And this is what I see folks that are more expert than me doing as well in their workflows. So we're going to pick save as PDF, and then we'll figure out where we want to save it. And I'm just going to drop it on my desktop for right now. So in that instance, it functions a little bit different in that it does not automatically open the Adobe software, and I have to either go to that file location or go to Adobe and open it from that location. So I'm going to open both of these up so you guys can kind of see how those two pieces of information are different.
And Josh, you're using Adobe Pro, right?
Yes, sir. So this is Adobe Acrobat Pro. And it's important to recognize that everything else we're doing from this point further in Adobe Acrobat Pro can only be done in Adobe Acrobat Pro. There are some other tools available within the market that can help with some of this work, but this is my workflow. So I'm in Adobe Acrobat Pro now. And I'm going to go back before we go any further into this to my slide deck to show you guys the next slide in it. So before we get started, within that Adobe Acrobat Pro, there are some tools we're going to need to make sure that we have available to us. And I like to pin those tools so that they're always there every time I'm in Acrobat Pro. So we want to make sure we have our content panel tool, our reading order tool, our accessibility tags, And then I like to add our pre-flights in there as well. And those pre-flights are great because there are some simple pre-flights we can run. And that's like a print productivity thing that Adobe has built in that will resolve some issues that sometimes pop up within our various accessibility checkers. And then also I've got a accessible PDF fillable form checklist that I've been drafting within our systems of operation. I've previously shared a version of it, but I made some updates, so I'll reshare that out with you all later today as well. But we want to make sure we have these tools available because they're going to help us with the rest of this process. The easiest way to find those tools, to pin them to your toolbar, is truly just to come up to your search option and search for them. So if I search for reading order, it's going to then give me this reading order, prepare for accessibility, and I can then open it, which will look like this, and then I can pin it. So once it's opened over here on my right-hand side, I can just right-click on it, and then I can say I want to pin it to my available tools. Do note that these options over here, so my content pane, my reading order pane, and my accessibility tags, depending on your version of Adobe Acrobat that you're running, it could be flipped. Sometimes if it's an older version, this bar of tools was previously on the left-hand side, and these tools that are floating in this bar on the left-hand side were previously on the right-hand side. So do know that they could be on the opposite sides of your screen than what I'm displaying. But we want to find all of those tools. So I've got my content panel, my reading order panel, and my accessibility tags. And we want those tools there because we'll do different stages of the accessibility work in these PDFs across those panels. The content panel, yes.
Sorry, Josh, could you zoom in just a bit?
Yeah, sorry.
If possible, you got a real big monitor, I can tell. Big monitor gets it done. But
yeah, let me see what I can do.
In our little compact Teams screen, it might be tough.
Yeah, good point.
If not, people can deal.
They might have to just zoom in on theirs, John, because I don't know how I can zoom in Adobe.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great. I should have thought that through a little further, John.
That's okay.
I'll go back here in a minute to Google and I'll just show you guys the icons for them. The reading order icon's like a Z and the accessibility tag looks like a luggage tag. Yeah, next time a bigger user interface in front might be helpful. Yeah, I could change my screen resolution. Yeah, you guys are bringing up all great options for how I could make it. I can definitely adjust my screen resolution here in just a minute. We'll do that real quick. The fun of working on the fly.
This is great, though.
Right,
I really like how you showed, starting from Word. You don't just fix a PDF. Sometimes you want to start from the source.
Yeah, it's really all about that workflow and ensuring, all right, this is going to get real big real fast. And then I'll go back to zooming out. Oh no, it went too big. You guys can't see anything.
There we go.
Getting closer. Still can't see what you need to see. Come on. All right. So hopefully now you guys can maybe see a little better. Come on, close out. Let me get back to my control panel.
Getting lots of thumbs up.
All right. So yeah, so this one that looks like a page with the corner turned down, that's our content panel. We don't generally do a lot of work in the content panel because it can mess up all kinds of other structures within your document. But every once in a while, there's something you'll have to dig out in the content panel. So it's helpful to have there. This next one, the Z looking one, that's our reading order. And we won't end up messing with reading order much today. But if you had a complex table in a PDF document, you're going to have to do some additional steps within your reading order pane to make sure that that table is fully accessible in your final version. So it's helpful to have in there. It's also important to know and understand right now that depending on the screen reader technology that's interacting with your document, they rely on different elements within a PDF depending on the screen reader. So NVDA, which we've talked about before, and JAWS are the two most commonly used screen reader technologies out there. Both of those rely fully on your accessibility tags and all of the information conveyed in that accessibility tag. However, VoiceOver on Mac, and then some of the other things that are out there on the market, like the built-in reader that's in Acrobat Pro, they actually rely on your reading order panel to ensure that you're getting the proper sequencing. So when I move into these next steps of my process here, the next piece, now that I'm in the PDF, would be to actually start working in the reading order and the accessibility tags. But what I shared with you guys earlier was I wanted you to see the difference of what gets exported over depending on how we do that migration, right? So we did two different migrations. And so here's the one that we did where I did the export to PDF, and then we have our secondary one here that shows or actually this is the export to PDF, and the first one there was the save as to PDF. So you'll notice in the export process using the ribbon in Adobe, it put everything in this section catchment. And that section piece doesn't get voiced. It's just kind of a way to organize content. If this was a multi-page document, you'd have multiple sections. It's something you can leave or remove. It's not really required. But it's a good sample and a good example of, depending on your path that you follow to get it over to the PDF, you're going to have two different experiences. When we do the other method, where I'm doing the file save as, it doesn't put anything in sections, and we just have the heading structures and the paragraph tags. From here, the next step is actually to check for some of that accessibility before we do anything else within this document. And I think I'll stay zoomed in like this because I think we can do everything else that we need within this zoomed field. And so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just work through one of these documents. We don't need to have both open anymore. So I'm going to get rid of the other one, and we're just going to work through this document. And what brought on this conversation, and I think part of why Amy and John asked me to do this, is Amy had shared that one of the trainings she had done said not to bring any of your tags over. And at that time I shared, I was like, I actually prefer in my system to bring my tags over. And both of those can work. You can work through either of those systems, but I like to have all of my tags over here because it gives us the catchment places we'll need for those fillable fields. So once I'm in Adobe Acrobat Pro, the first thing I want to do is I want to check my reading order. So I'm going to go into that reading order panel. And what I'm looking to do here is just make sure that these elements in our reading order panel are navigating in the order in which I want them to be navigated in. So I want to make sure that if I just click on this first one and then use my down arrow key, that it goes through my document in the order that I want everybody else to go through my document in. So I'm just going to kind of navigate down through these using that down arrow and make sure that it's kind of going through those pieces as we navigate. Once I've confirmed that, and I know that everything is good in my reading order, I then am going to switch over to my accessibility tags panel and do the exact same process. So I'm going to click on my first tag, and then I'm going to navigate down through these tags to make sure that I'm hitting every piece of information in the order I want it to hit in. One of the things that I know as I get to this part of my document in particular is that all of these elements right here are housed in a table. And I did that table just to give me my placeholders for the fillable form fields. So if you've done that yourself, there's a next step that we're going to do to move that information because we don't need it voiced as a table. We just needed that formatting to get it over here. And then I finish my navigation and I see this. One thing that we'll note here is that we have an empty P tag, and that's because when the document was created, an enter key was used and created what's called a hard return, which creates this empty P tag. And I know it's an empty P tag because no text is highlighted on the PDF. And when I expand that P tag by clicking the drop-down caret or using my right arrow key, it shows me this actual element with nothing connected to it. Whereas if I expand this upper P tag, I can see it has full name and then it has all my underscores attached to it. So my process here, and this again is not a required element, but I like to get rid of extraneous stuff that I don't need, is that I actually will get rid of this P tag. And there's a structured process for getting rid of that P tag. The first thing I need to do is I need to right click on this element within that P tag, and I need to make that element an artifact. We want to make it an artifact first, because if we just delete it, it's going to create accessibility issues for you on the back end. So I'm going to change that element to a artifact. It does not matter what you pick. So I could pick page, pagination, and layout. None of those matter. You can just hit OK. You'll see it gets rid of that element. And once that element is gone, I can now delete this. I like to always use the delete empty tags option, because that prevents me from deleting a tag that still has an element in it and kind of protects me on the back end. So I'm going to get rid of that. The next step here is I need to get everything out of my table, because I don't need those pieces of information in the table. They were just there for that placeholder. So on a Mac, I'm going to press and hold my Option key and click this drop-down caret, which expands everything else from there. On a Windows-based computer, you would press and hold Control and then click that drop-down caret, and that will expand it. And similarly, if I do it again, it will reduce them all. All right, so I've expanded them all. What I'm looking for at this point is I'm looking for the actual P tags that I need. All of the rest of this table information is extraneous, and so I don't need any of that. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to minimize these P tags, because it'll help me in moving them here in just a minute. And then I'm going to press and hold the Control key on Windows or the Option key on Mac, or Command key on Mac, to select these P tags. Those have the information I actually need. Once I've selected them, I can click and hold with my mouse, with my left button on my mouse, and drag them to where I want them. As I drag them under that heading 2 for additional information, you'll see there's a line that appears that shows me where it's going to drop these elements. We want to make sure that that line is the full width of the tag above it. If I move it up a little bit further, it'll shrink, and then it's going to try to drop it into that heading tag. I don't want that to happen. I want it to drop it where I want it, which is below that heading tag. So I'm going to click, drag, and they're now all hidden or moved to directly below that H2 tag. And then I can right click on that table tag and I can delete it. You'll notice that it didn't let me do the delete empty, because it recognizes that all of this information is still in there. But because none of it has any relevant information, I can go through that process of deleting it. And you can see that there's not an option here to make it an artifact. So I'm going to delete the table. And now I'm down to just those core elements that I actually need. I am not going to, at this time, delete these P tags that are empty. You could, but I'm going to choose not to because of the layout that I've assigned to this document. Once we've done all of these steps, we're now ready to actually do that fillable form process. So I'm going to look at all my tools. I'm going to say prepare form, create form. I need to save it before I create it. And it is now gone ahead and dropped in all of those form fields for me. If you've got kind of placeholders in place, like I did with the underscores or the table cell elements, you'll notice that it has caught everything I needed. I've got text fields for name, date of birth, email address. I've got checkboxes here, and then I've got spaces for all of that address information. I don't love the way these checkboxes are appearing, so I will look to kind of zoom in and restructure those. I could look to make them kind of so it fills that whole box. And there are things you can do in here too to make sure that things are aligned. If you're worried about alignment and stuff like that, using your tools over here on the left-hand side for your prepare form. But I'm going to zoom back out on my document now and look at those. So we have all of the form fields. I like the form fields, but there are some changes I need to make. From here, our next step is we need to make sure we have all of the relevant information for each of these form fields. And so within accessibility practices for the form fields, we need to add what's called a tooltip. That's the next step. And that tooltip is what's going to be conveyed to our screen reader users to be able to make sure they know what information is required in that space. So you can right click on the box here and go to properties, or you can do it in this right-hand navigation field. And either way, you're going to get an option that pops up for our tool field options. Adobe defaults by giving you a tooltip in here. That's a change that's happened more recently in Adobe. It did not previously do that. But we still need to come in and adjust these tooltips. And we need to adjust the tooltips because we want to make sure that if somebody is only getting information from that tooltip, they know exactly the type of information that we require for them to have in here and how we want it entered. So let's say with this full name, we know that we want it last name first and then first name second. So we would say full name, and then in parentheses, we could put something like last, comma, first. And if that's a required element that they need to fill in before they submit the form, we would want to go ahead and add that information here as well. So they know I need to put my full name in here. I need to put my last name and then a comma and then my first name. And this is a required space. And we would work our way down through each of these options. For date of birth, because I want it to actually do a physical date, we're going to want to look at the options panel here and look to see what's available there. But more specifically, we're going to do the format option, and then we're going to choose date. And then it's going to give us options for how we want that date formatted or what we want that requirement to look like. To simplify life right now, I'm just going to pick month, month, day, day, year, year. It shows me an example of what that looks like. And then I'm going to come back and do the tooltip here as well. And I'm going to give that indication of what we want for that information. Yes, Natalie.
So I see down there at common properties, there's a checkbox that says required. What does that do?
Yeah, so great question. So what that does is that means that before somebody could finish filling out this document, they would have to put information in there. So you can select that, and that would help for folks that are just traditional access users as well, if it's a required entry. But what I'm hearing right now from folks more expert than me is that we should do it in the tooltip and potentially in that required option at the bottom. So great question. Another thing that we want to think about, so I'm not going to do all of the tooltips right now, just in an effort to make sure we get through everything. Another thing we want to do is in our properties here, under our options, we want to think about what options are available for how it handles text. So I told you guys before when we were working in that source file that we want to make sure we allocate enough space here to be able to enter all of the text somebody would need to enter. And so your options within Adobe, since it won't rescale a box, are to either do multi-line or scrolling text. Scrolling text is a problem because it truly functions just like you think it does. It allows for text to go endlessly within the box, and a scroll bar appears on the side. And that's a problem for us because unless you're viewing the document digitally, you could lose information. So we want to make sure that's toggled off. Multi-line is a good option because then it allows for you to have more than one line of text within the box. But what multi-line then does is it will gradually reduce the size of the font that's left in that box as more text is added. So that's another piece to think about when doing that. But I like to generally select multi-line for all of mine and just make sure I've given enough space so that hopefully the font doesn't get too small. So once we've done that, we've added all of our tooltips for all of these things. Checkboxes really aren't any different than what we've done with other stuff. We would just come in and indicate what it is. What I would do with this is that I would add some additional information. So I would say, receive email updates, select for yes to receive. And so now somebody knows if they select that checkbox that it's going to receive, that they're going to receive email updates. After I've done all those tooltips, I'm going to click into the white space here, and I'm going to use my tab key on my keyboard to navigate through and make sure I'm going through these elements in the correct order. You can also do that by kind of looking at your order here. But this, again, is where we want to make sure that these fall in the order that we want somebody to interact with them within the document. So once we have all of that done, we're going to go ahead and close out our prepare form, and we now have all of these form fields, and we get to the last step in ensuring that this is a fully accessible and fillable PDF. And for this last piece, we need to go back to our accessibility tags. So once we're in our accessibility tags, the next step in this process is we need to just create an empty tag to catch these new fillable fields. Right now, they don't live in our accessibility tags, so we need to add them to our accessibility tags. To do that, I like to right-click on my bottom tag, I select new tag, and you can truly pick any out of here. I was taught early on to make it a P tag, but you don't have to. And then I'm going to go ahead and give it a title just so I know exactly what it is. And you'll see that it's now giving me this empty P tag, and it tells me that it's that tag catch P tag. My next step here is going to be to right-click on that and do this find option. Once we have the find option open, it's going to tell me I can find elements. And in this dropdown, I'm going to pick unmarked annotations. So all of those form fields are considered an annotation within this. And I'm going to tell it that I want it to find all of those annotations. And I'm going to tell it to search the entire document. I'm going to do that, especially if I have a multi-page document. Then click find. And it said it didn't find any.
Can you explain what an annotation is?
So an annotation ends up covering a bunch of different options within your accessibility tags. They can be footnotes and things of that nature, but it's a way that it gets marked up in the back end to assign some things. I don't fully know, John, beyond that, what exactly it ends up standing for. But I'm also not understanding why it's not finding them. All right, so I'm going to try this unmarked content option instead. Usually it does it through that annotation piece, so we'll see if it works this way. It's always fun when you're demoing something and Adobe has made some kind of change on you. So I'm going to try this unmarked content and see if it works. It's found some stuff. I'm going to tell it to tag the element, and I'm going to keep doing that. It's tagging a bunch of stuff I don't want it to tag. So that's going to be fun. I can tell what it's tagging because it's highlighting it in purple. So it just gave me this purple underline under the zip code option here. And so I'm not really sure what's happening there. So that didn't work. So I can tell it didn't work also because now it's got all these path elements, and those path elements are all that randomness that I didn't actually need. So I'm going to select all of those and artifact them because that didn't do what we needed it to do. Let's go back to our source file and bring it over and see if we can make this work. Sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on with Adobe, but we'll see if we can make this work a different way real quick. So let's go back into our tools. Let's add those pair form, create form, save it. I'm not going to do the tooltips. We're going to skip some steps.
Joshua, is it possible that you still have that prepare form tool open?
So that's a great question. I'm pretty sure I closed it out and finished it, and it's not appearing on my right-hand side or my left-hand bar. So that shouldn't be the problem, but that is something to usually check. It's a great question. Let's see if it'll find them here. All right, so it is finding them now. So there was something buggy happening in that other document, but you can see the process now. So there's now a purple box that has appeared around the form element that I put next to full name. And so I'm going to select tag element, and then I'm going to keep doing that for each of those form fields. All right, now that I've done all of that, we have those form fields and they all live over here in that P tag that we created, that empty P tag. You'll see that they all have this OBJR, so that's an object reference tag, and that's just another way of denoting what it is. You'll notice too that it kind of did them in reverse order, right? The last one we tagged is the top one here. That doesn't really matter. The next step from here is I need to put these where I want them. And so I'm going to look at expanding all of my tags real quick so that I can see everything that I want to see and put things where I need to. So I know that I need one of those form fields to drop in under this full name. So the next step is I need to right click on that and add new tag. And then I need to find my form tag option from the dropdown. And I'm going to hit OK. And so it's given me that empty form tag. Once I have that empty form tag, I then come down and find my object reference tag. And I'm going to bring that up and put it nested inside that form tag. So that object reference for full name now lives within that form tag within the P tag that is associated with that full name. And you want to do all that because your form tag has to nest in a paragraph tag or some other type of tag. It could nest in a heading tag. It can't stand alone or you'll get some other accessibility errors. And you want it to be grouped together because all of that information carries over to each other. So we would do that same process for the rest. Add a new tag here, add that form tag, find my date of birth, click and drag, and drop it into the appropriate space for date of birth nested within that form. So that would be the rest of our process. We would do that for all of the rest of our form elements. We pull them and drop them in their correct space. So looking at the time, we're at 4 minutes to 12, and I want to pause here to give folks an opportunity to do questions. At this point, we would finish that process and save the document, and then it would be really fully ready to go and we could check it across our other systems. I personally like to use the pack checker because the built-in accessibility checker in Adobe is not set to any standards. I see a question in the chat. Why did we create the OBJR for all the fields? What's the purpose? So we have to have those OBJR tags for it to actually get voiced and be carried over to our alternate access users. Without those object reference tags, they wouldn't do the work we need them to do in being voiced and be fully accessible form fields. So that's why we have to have those OBJRs. John, you had a question?
Yeah, so I just want to try to summarize based on the notes I took and what you presented. So correct me if this is the wrong order and kind of everything you shared. So first you formatted from Word.
Yep.
Then you did the metadata, adjusted the metadata using the properties. Then you adjusted the reading order.
Yep.
Then the tag order.
Yep.
Then you cleaned up some tags.
Yep.
That was when you moved it out of the table, I think. And then create form fields.
Yep.
Using Adobe Pro. Then you set the tooltips and the field formatting.
Yep.
And then you added form tags.
Correct.
Right after you kind of had that hiccup there with the annotations.
Yep.
And then you're saying then you use you like to use Pack for final accessibility checking.
Correct.
So did I miss anything?
You did not. The only thing that I kind of ran out of time to do was to go over pre-flights. And so these pre-flights are another menu that you can get on your screen. This is what that pre-flight menu looks like. And what I'll do, John, after this is I'll send you and Amy my pre-flight checklist for the pre-flights that I like to run and my checklist for fillable forms. That way you guys can share them out with the community at large.
What is a pre-flight?
So these pre-flights are some built-in fixes that Adobe has available. So within this pre-flight menu, I would select the PDF standards option and then the wrench icon. And then I can search for some things like making sure that it uses the document structure for your tab order. And so what that means is that it will use the layout we've assigned in the accessibility tags for that tab-only navigation.
Okay.
So it does some things like that. You can set your document language. So as long as you've set your document language here to be appropriate. So in the document properties, if I go to my tag, and then my language ID here. I can set my language for whatever the language is for the document. And then I can do this pre-flight to make sure that any screen reader knows when they get into it that that's what it's going to be. This is also where you can set it so it shows the proper title that we set in the metadata as your title at the top. And there's like 6 pre-flights that I like to run. And I've got kind of directions on how to use those that we can share out after the fact.
Okay, my last question, and before we open it up for others, and we may have to go on past 12. We're hitting 12 now.
That's
but,
fine. I've got some time.
Okay, if you didn't have to explain all this every step, how long does it take you, to maybe do the document you shared?
So a document that simple, where it's just a few, is probably like at most 20-minute fix for me.
Okay.
It really is largely dependent on the nature of the document and how complex it is. PDF documents that I've remediated have taken me anywhere from 20-ish minutes to a week, depending on the complexity of the document. So here's what that fillable form checklist looks like. It walks through everything we just talked about. And so I'll pull this out of Google and share it with everybody, or get it to John and Amy to share with everybody later. But I'll stop talking so people can ask some questions. Henry, I see your question. So in that final one where I was showing that last step, it didn't have the table deleted. We deleted the table in the first version, but then we ran into issues with it finding those object reference tags that we needed to create. So yes, I would have gone in and gotten rid of all of this table elements. I would have pulled all of these out like we did on that first one, but it just is not present here because I was trying to make sure we got through the rest of the steps. Sorry for that hiccup and confusion. Angela, I see you have a question. Go ahead.
Hey, Joshua, thank you. I got actually 2 questions. It's about the pack checker.
Okay.
The first thing is, has this been approved by security PSO for us to download it? Second of all, since you're using a Mac, how do you actually use it? Do you have got a virtual machine on your Mac?
So that's a great question. So yes, so PAC and NVDA and JAWS only run on the Windows operating system. And so I actually have an older Windows laptop that I use just for that purpose. It's a really cumbersome kind of process for me to follow, and it's not a best approach by any means. So that's my workflow is I do all the work on my Mac, save it to a flash drive, take it to my Windows machine, and then check it.
Let me help, Josh. So to install software, you need to go through your own agency's software approval processes. We can't really give advice generally, unfortunately.
Yep. That was getting ready to be my next statement is it's approved within DPI. We've gone through those processes. I can't speak for other agencies.
And what about for DIT? Has that been approved?
Not right now. We're working on it though.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Because I think for DHHS, we're in the same boat as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Trip?
Hey, thanks, Josh. Is there any reason, or do you always avoid adding form controls in Word before conversion and do it within Adobe, or does it depend on the complexity of the document? Is it 6 of one, half dozen of another, or
it's
not?
really 6 of one, half a dozen the other. If you're using that developer ribbon in Word to add some like a text field instead of doing the underscore for the placeholder, what happens when you do that fillable form in the PDF is it will not auto-populate that form field for you because when you do the conversion, it doesn't show that text box. So it kind of just depends on your workflow. There's not a right or wrong way. The one that I demoed today was all about kind of doing it the lazy approach so that it would give me all of the form fields I needed pre-populated. Doing some of the other systems may mean that you have to manually add those form fields within Adobe.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great presentation, by the way. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, anytime. It was a rush.
Careful with that anytime promise. You might actually get requests, Josh. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. You clearly have been doing this for some time.
John, I'm probably going on 10 to 15 years worth of some level of document accessibility work. So you learn things along the way for sure. And as I said early on, like we're all in just various states of learning. My I actually, in preparation for this, the checklist that I made some changes on it like just yesterday because I realized some things had changed in Adobe and I needed to adjust those things. So,
Well, that's awesome. Any last questions? Any last final thoughts? We will be posting this link up to our YouTube channel. I'll send the link out when it's ready, and I'm sure this is going to be a session that gets shared a lot. So yeah, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
yeah, absolutely.
All right, everybody, have a great rest of